If you're into yard finds and glorious old junk and a little bit of automotive trivia on the side, this is going to be the video for you. This is going to be about Turner's Auto Wrecking in Fresno, California. It's been run by the same family since 1960 and is still operated by Jerry Turner, who's an old guy who knows everything about every car in his yard. You know what's really cool, actually? In 1988, he even tried to get a racetrack built on his yard. How cool would that have been? And he did build an airstrip, and you're going to see some of that stuff here in the episode. Now, what this is going to be is photos. I have been to Turner's 4 times. The first time was in 2014. Each time I was up there shooting various TV shows, and I shot a bunch of images while I was there. And so what I'm going to do is narrate those images and talk about stuff. It's going to be just like a regular old junkyard crawl or junkyard walk, except for I won't actually be in the frame. And so because some of these photos were shot as much as 11 years ago, don't be looking at this and going shopping. There's a good possibility the stuff is gone or that it's not for sale. So you can call Turner's and do some business with them and see what they've got, but don't expect these cars to be there. All right, let's get into it. There's a lot to see. To begin with, yes, this is the wrecking yard that Mike Finnegan and I went to in 2014 and executed the episode of Roadkill with the truck that we called Pigpen. It was a 1950 GMC. And I went back and forth trying to decide if that's what year it is. And I figured out it is because I believe that it is the last year with no vent window. And that's what makes it a 1950, I believe. So we went up there and rescued that thing with its inline 6-cylinder engine. And we tried to drive it out of there, and it didn't really work. And it turned out that the exhaust was simply pinched off, and that's why the engine was running so badly and smoking up through the crankcase. So that was not cool, but for some reason it became a legend, and I can tell you where Pigpen is today. It ended up on the TV show called Faster with Newbern and Cotton, and it was owned by our showrunner Dustin Gould, and right now it's running around with an S10 chassis and an LS7 for power. And so Pigpen lives. And it all came from Turner's Auto Wrecking. This is inside one of the great buildings with the good stuff, and that is a 1956 Buick Special and a 57 Chevy Bel Air. And check out all the generators on the shelf underneath those bicycles, and on the wall, a zillion air cleaners. You know what's one thing that I think is really cool that they did in at least 1956 and 1957? Buick put the model year of the car on the badge. It's on the trunk here on this 56, and I know the 57's put it on the nose. Are there any other models of Buicks that have the model year on there? I'm not sure. Or is there any other car, period, that puts the model year on it? This old race car is glorious. I think it's a 37 or 38 Ford. It was obviously a circle track car, probably a dirt track car. Look at the hand-painted lettering for Jack's Used Cars. Awesome. And you can tell that there was another sponsor on there even before that. Stuff like this is completely not salvageable, but I just love to see it. I hope it never leaves. Can you identify this engine? It's a combination of American and English technology. It's a 2.0 liter 4-cylinder. It's dual overhead cam. It's got 16 valves. You guessed it. This is a Cosworth Vega. This was a project that came out in 1975. They also sold them in 1976. An attempt to make the Vega cool, because obviously it was their little compact gas mileage car. Unbelievably to me, the advertising for these cars actually said, get 1 Vega for the price of 2. And the copy says, if you want performance at this level, you're going to have to pay handsomely. Unbelievable. Talk about a way to sell something. But they were trying to show that they had really put effort into the Vega having huge horsepower. And the bottom line is it didn't. It was the smog era, and it just wasn't that good. They sold 3,500 of them, and they were done after 2 model years. Hey, you're running out of time to join me and Derek Bieri, Lucky Costa, and Steve Dulcich at the Duct Tape Drags. It's October 17th and 18th at TUCSON DRAGWAY, and I'm talking about 2025. You can still get car tent camping spots. You can still join the world's least showy car show. You can still sign up for the Vice Grip Garage Burnout Pit. And of course, you can come as a spectator. We have sold out racing. We've sold out RV camping spots. It's going to be a party. We're going to have the bonfire like usual. Duct tape drags. You really want to be there. Tucson Dragway, October 18th, 2025 is the big day. You can get tickets in advance, and we'd very much appreciate that. The link is in my description. Here's a 1965 Buick Sport Wagon. It's just like the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser with the glass up there in the roof. They only made the Buick to 1969. They started in 1964. These are on the A body chassis, just like a Chevelle. Note the trim on that front fender. It's got those 3 little bumps in it. That is meant to replicate the famous Buick Ventaports. I know you think they were called portholes, but they are Ventaports. Let's be honest, the Dodge designers slaughtered the classic Charger style in 1971. We all love the 68 to 70 so much, and then 71 was such a letdown. But you know what? People are starting to get into them, up to and including me. I would actually have one of these. I have shopped for them. And that's from a guy who in 1992 actually wrote in Hot Rod magazine that the 71 Charger was ugly by design. I got in big trouble for that. Okay, quick, what engine is this? You can tell just by the valve train layout and also the intake port design. Think about it. You've got those push rods coming in up under the wrong side of the rocker arm by the standards of many of the classic V8s. Yes, this is a Buick nailhead. They made it from 1953 to 1966 in 2 different generations. The most popular, the most well-known are going to be the 401 or maybe the 425 near the end. But here's the thing that you might not know. In 1958, they advertised the Buick cars as a B-58, kind of like a bomber, and they said that the engine was a B-12,000. Their argument was that each piston made 12,000 pounds of thrust on every power stroke. Do you believe it? It was the 50s, who cares? Okay, I have searched extensively for 30 or 40 seconds and cannot figure out what this badge is. It looks like an A with a snail on its back. Do you have any idea what this is from? It looks like a tractor. Is it an Alice or something? I don't know. You will comment back with your expert tutelage and let me know. This is a scrapyard. It's called Turner's Auto Wrecking, not Turner's Auto Saving Forever, even though a lot of that goes on. And this is the Masher. This was built by Jerry Turner himself in 1974, and it is a big car crusher. And importantly, it is powered by a 440 Mopar. How elegant is that? All right, you can't escape a Freiburger Junkyard episode without hearing the fun fact that the Chevy Love means light utility vehicle. But how about the Mikado trim level? What does that mean? Well, it's an antiquated American term for the Emperor of Japan. It's a Gilbert and Sullivan show, and it's also a trim level that gets you fancier seats and carpet and other doohickeys on the inside of your Chevy Love. But have you heard of the Love Mighty Mike? Like M-I-K-E? Well, that is the graphics sticker package that went on the outside of your Chevy Love Mikado. Man, the 70s were good. It's hard to believe that a 68 Chevelle would be in the junkyard even 10 years ago, which is probably when I shot this. But look at that sprint car wing. Homemade. This is a 1962 Valiant, and note that I did not say Plymouth Valiant because this was a time when Valiant was just its standalone brand. Kind of like what Ford tried to do with the Comet. They wanted it to just be a division. Same with the Valiant, which is bizarre because the Dodge Lancer, which at the time was kind of the same car with different sheet metal, it was a Dodge. So I don't know why they did it that way, but 1962 is good, because this was the heart of the couple of years when they were making an all-aluminum block for the Slant Six. This is a 1969 Cougar, and I find it hilarious that they've circled the Bondo spots on the quarter panel. This is a 1967 Plymouth Barracuda, and way back then, John Hurlitz designed a show car that would heavily influence this car. Hurlitz would go on and design like the 70 Cuda and the 71 Roadrunner, but at the time he created this thing that was called the Barracuda Formula SX. And then he sort of walked away, and John Sampson, who had designed the earlier Barracuda, he took over the project. And I paused there for a sec because I realized, you say Hurlitz, you say Sampson. It was a team of designers who did this, but those guys were sort of the lead. And Sampson's interesting because he's the guy who reportedly came up with the name Barracuda before it was released in 1964. Now, if you look back at this Formula SX, to me, it looks very similar to the 1968 GM A-bodies. Guess why? Hurlitz worked at GM while those were being designed. This is a Willys Overland Jeepster. They made them in 1948 through 1950. The designer of them was Brooks Stevens, who would go on to develop the 1963 Wagoneer, which formed the shape of all sorts of Jeep wagons and trucks and panels from that point up into the early 90s. Unfortunately, the Jeepster was kind of a flop. Even though it came with both the 4-cylinder and with an inline 6, it just wasn't sporty or powerful enough. They thought they were going to capture the market of returning servicemen who wanted a little sports vehicle, and you couldn't even get them in 4-wheel drive. But they ended up only selling about 19,000 of them over 3 years, and then they smoked them. Jeepster was out of there. Thermoquads! All right, I've turned these carburetors into kind of a punchline. They became a joke on the Roadkill show, but they were actually pretty good. They made competition series ones up to 1,000 CFM. In OE applications, I think they started in 1971 on Mopar products, and I couldn't tell you when they ended, but the punchline about them is that they're plastic. The main body is. Actually, it's not plastic, it's phenolic resin, which is the same stuff that they make pool balls out of today. Can you guess which car this is? Check it out. I'll give you a hint, it's the taillight area. You got it by now? Well, if you haven't, it's a 1959 Ford. What's interesting is these things are not that popular today, but they were kind of a hit when they were brand new. And in fact, the 1959 Ford marked the 50 millionth car that Ford made. And this show car that says 50 millionth on the side, it's actually still around today. Turner's is where I first fell in love with a 1966 Chrysler 300C. This particular one, I loved the red, which you don't see that much, and the red interior. Just imagine the swagger when you drove this thing off the showroom floor in '66. That car would smell like Winston's in no time. You know you had the TNT 440 because you would be just emasculated if you got the 383. Anyway, this car is pretty cool. I could stand to have one in a convertible. The best junkyards have the weirdest homemade creations. I mean, who looks at a 4-door early Corvair and says to themselves, this would make a great trike? I guess because it's rear-engined or something. I don't know. This 1968 Camaro, which maybe they don't have anymore, don't call and see if it's for sale. It reminds me of the show Junkyard Gold, and here's why. When that Motor Trend show was just a concept, I was the host who went and shot the pilot at Turner's Auto Wrecking, and the showrunner at the time really wanted to have a sort of digital rendering of a transformation, like which car would you pull out of the yard and build, and let's show that sort of in a digital format to show people how stuff can be resurrected. And I picked this 68 Camaro right here. Now, when that show went on to become Junkyard Gold on Motor Trend, I was way too busy to host the thing. And so I said, you know what? Steve Magnate would be way better than me at this anyway. And so they did hire him. And Tom Taylor, who worked for me at Hot Rod Magazine, as well as being a legendary designer and all sorts of other things, he was on the show for a little while. And then it was Magnate solo. And you know what? You can still see Steve Magnate today. Check him out here on YouTube. It is Magnante, Magnante. We call him Steve Magneto. How cool is this barn scene? I love it. If I was a hardcore motorcycle guy, this would be gold. And maybe it is, because this is an Allstate motorcycle. It was a bike sold by Sears and Roebuck. They sold a bunch of vehicles, actually. I take this one to be about a 1965. And from my research, because I know nothing about this, it seems like they were made by PUCH. P-U-C-H, I think that's how it's pronounced. But they had other vehicles made by other manufacturers. They even sold a car. As you may know, the Henry J, circa 1951 to 53, was also available as an Allstate, which means you could just go to your local department store and buy a car. This is a 1937 Ford, and it has some weird aftermarket headlight inserts because the 37 actually had like a big glass bulb, but they converted them to use a more conventional round headlight later on. Now, the 37 Ford was the vehicle that originated the V860, which was a little miniature version of the Ford flathead V8, and it made 60 horsepower. They were gutless in passenger cars, but they were really popular in midget racing. The other cool thing about this 37 is that it appears here in this newspaper story about Jerry Turner from 1988. So yeah, the dude hangs on to stuff. This 1970 Dodge Challenger looks like it could be saved by today's standards. Probably not by me, but somebody would do it. But then this 72, that thing is made of leverite, which means lever right there. That's my opinion anyway. It's a 72. I recently passed up an opportunity to get a really cool old street machine that had been parked since the 80s in a garage covered in rat poo, and it was a 72, and that's part of the reason I turned it down. I also thought it was a little too expensive. Even though it was a 344 speed car, maybe I should have gotten it. No, I shouldn't have, because it was a 72. Sorry, just don't like them. 72 to 74. That's how I make enemies, you know that? That's how, in 1992, I wrote in Hot Rod Magazine that 71 Chargers are ugly, and the whole Mopar community went after me. Opinions, they hurt. And this is the Dollar General. Bill Holmes was a well-known boat and fiberglass guy, and he had the Holmes Fiberglass Boat Company in Costa Mesa, California back in the 70s, and they made the Horizon boats. One of the greatest finds here at Turner's underneath this shack is a 1954 Kaiser Manhattan. Now, these things used a Continental inline six that was completely gutless, 118 horsepower, and they couldn't engineer a new engine for it, and so they went to the best solution, boost! These things have a McCulloch supercharger on them, little centrifugal unit, designed by one of my heroes, Robert Paxton McCulloch. You heard all about him in the video that I did on how airplane parts connect to car parts. You should go see that. Speaking of which, that's a B29 piston right there. People ask me about this on my bench every once in a while. Alan Reinhart gave me this, and it's super cool and not featured in that video that I did about aircraft and airplanes. But Robert Paxton McCulloch, yes, supercharger, OE application on the 54 and I think also 55 Kaiser Manhattan, and it brought that 118 horsepower to a very angry 140. Back when I was doing car magazines, I wasn't just the editor, I was pretty involved in the art layouts as well and redesigned several magazines. And I'm a big fan of grit and texture. And so we used this photo of the red, white, and blue tire in several magazine layouts. And we would do a very clever crop, really tight view on it or something, posterize it or do a high contrast filter on it or something, and use it as the background of a page. So if you come from the magazine era of maybe Hot Rod Deluxe, definitely Roadkill magazine, maybe Hot Rod, you've probably seen this photo before. It looks to me like this tire came off a demo derby car. DeSoto was a car maker that was owned by Chrysler that from a price point of view fell just below Plymouth and just above Dodge. And in 1952, DeSoto had its own Hemi. Now there's a lot of confusion about the early Chrysler Hemi, and Chrysler had absolutely nothing to do with the DeSoto Hemi, which had absolutely nothing to do with the Dodge Hemi, and Plymouth didn't get a Hemi till 1964. Anyway, this Dodge Hemi was interesting because it was called the Fire Dome, and the car was also called the Fire Dome. Do you know of another example of an engine name simultaneously being the model name of the car? Now they had Fire Dome, and then they went to the Fire Flight, and then the Fire Sweep. But in 1957, they had a polyspheric engine, let down, and then they had the wedge engines in, I think, 58, 59. And between that and other market forces, the DeSoto went downhill and was canceled in 1961. However, they got really swank along the way. In 1955, Virgil Exner, who was in charge of design at Chrysler, he redid them in the forward look. And I think they were really, really neat. In 1957, they kind of redesigned them again, and this went to a design ethic that was called the flight sweep. Aircraft stuff, I guess. But anyway, you know, the truth is, for me, DeSotos are the best mid-50s Mopars. I know everyone likes the Plymouth Christine. I know there's the Dodge that was on Highway Patrol, but DeSoto nailed it, in my opinion. You know, I love scenes like this, and I want to believe that they will always be there. Of note to me on this thing is the vending machine that's all the way at the back. It says, Tom's Toasted Peanuts. It turns out that Tom Houston was a guy who invented a mechanical peanut shelling machine. He was also friends with Dr. George Washington Carver, who was a scientist who specialized in peanut stuff, among other things. But anyway, Tom went on in 1925 to make this snack company called Tom's Toasted Peanuts. And it went on for a long time, ended up with corporate takeovers, and it was closed down, I think, just a few years ago. But that vending machine is cool. Trivia, what is the very first Chevy van? Well, it's a Corvair. The Greenbrier was based on the Corvair from 1961 to 1965. Rear-engined, flat, air-cooled six, the whole program. It was like an Americanized VW bus. And unfortunately, it gave way to the more conventional vans, the flat-faced ones. But you know what? I think the Greenbriers are really cool. Not to mention the pickups that they also had. I shot this photo at least a decade ago, so I've forgotten what this is, but it was buried in the weeds, and this is a custom paint technique that is called the Endless Line. This is a 1963 Oldsmobile F85 wagon, and according to the American Car Spotter's Bible, they only made 6,647 of these things. It was likely powered by the 215 cubic inch all aluminum Olds V8. But to me, the interesting thing is that liftgate. That was very uncommon for wagons of the day, and incredibly inconvenient. I don't like that in modern SUVs at all, especially when they've got the button and it opens and closes itself. And so you're standing at the airport and somebody at the driver's seat has got the thing in gear so the thing won't open. So they put it in park and hit the button, and then you do the countdown waiting for it to open, and then it's not quite open. So you reach in to get your luggage and you hit your head, then you get your luggage, then you have to hit the button, and then you don't trust it to go all the way down, and the person can't drive until it leaves. And so you stand there waiting for it to go all the way down, which maybe it doesn't if it hits somebody else's luggage, and then it goes back up. Why do they sell those things? Is there anyone in the comments who actually thinks those are a good idea? Well, maybe you can blame Oldsmobile. I don't know who was first with that. Well, actually, kind of, I do. They were available like that in the 50s and 40s on sedan deliveries often. But it was wrong then too. This is a 1964 Imperial, which seems like the perfect car to go on a martini run at Leisure World, which, by the way, also started in 1964, which may well be the most useless piece of trivia that you've heard so far in this episode. But wait, it gets worse. When I was at Turner's, they told me that there used to be an airstrip there, and I went to Historic Aerials and was looking through photos, and they only had, I think, 1967, and then it jumped to 1972. And in the 1972 photo that you see here, you can witness the airstrip. It's just above the canal in the middle there, and it's got the X on it. So they were actually flying in and out of there, and the only remnants left of that is a dirt road and a couple of airplanes plus a hangar. I'm not an airplane guy, but I think it's pretty cool to have aircraft sitting around in your junkyard. This 69 Camaro front clip is tired. This is one of the greatest things that I've seen at Turner's. It is the fender off of a step-side truck, like an old 50s one, and hand-painted on there, it says Hemi Hunter. What do you bet that thing had a big block Chevy in it? Just a guess. I sure wish I had taken a photo of that whole truck, but all I have is this detail, and it's neat. Turner's has had a couple of fires. On the Masher, there's a note about one that was in 1988 that apparently was struck down in about an hour. But then in 2009, they had a big fire, and this shelf unit here with all the bearings and stuff, it really shows the evidence of that. This is a 47 or 48 Ford, and I know that because the turn signals are round and below the headlights, whereas in 1946 on a car that looks nearly identical, it's got sort of rectangular turn signals and they're above the grille. The other thing you can see here is this Cougar quarter panel, and for some reason that's freaking me out. It's like a severed limb or something. I don't know. Can't explain it. I'm kind of jealous of their 1970 Buick Wildcat convertible. It's pretty good. You know, I've been wanting to get a huge American convertible for a while now, and how could I reject the best Buick 455 ever? Well, not in the stage cars and stuff, but for an average cruising 455, 1970, 10-to-1 compression, 510 pound-feet of torque at 2,600 RPM. After 1970, they were just continuously enfeebled by emissions regulations. So 1970 was it. And the other reason to own that car is 1970 is the very last year of the Wildcat. This is a 1938 Ford truck. Now, the way to tell the difference between a 38 and a 39 is that a 38 looks like it's got three grille sections. It's got a panel on each side with the horizontal bars, and then there's a center bar. In 39, the horizontal bars actually connect to the center bar. So now you know more than you ever needed to know about identifying the 38 and 39 Ford truck. I really don't dig these. Do you? I had to throw out a lifeline to Sam Strube to identify what this vehicle is, and it turns out it's probably a 1924, and it is a Dodge. But I just love the lettering on here with the whole Volstead Act theme. It's likely not original, But I don't know, they really captured sort of a moment right there. I dig it, and it makes me want a beer. A Hudson pickup truck. Yeah, the company that was known for passenger cars made these pickups just before World War II and also just after. I think the earlier ones were called Big Boys, and I'm pretty sure that they dropped that circa 1946. But they looked like passenger cars, didn't they? And they used a lot of passenger car parts, like in the interior, so that it was all plush and comfortable and great. And very unusually for the period, it was a truck with independent front suspension. So there you go, the Hudson pickup truck, pretty cool. Pop quiz. What is a Chrysler fluid drive? Now, you should know this because I just went over it in an episode that was a couple weeks ago, but maybe you didn't watch that, or maybe you're just going to hear it again right now because I'm filling time. The fluid drive started in Chryslers in 1939, and it found its way to other Chrysler brands, and it ended in the early 50s sometime, I think 52 or 53. What it was a fluid coupling that was immediately behind the engine before the clutch. So it goes engine, fluid coupling, clutch, and then a full regular manual transmission. And the point of this deal is you could put the transmission in any gear, and you could go cruising on the street, and you would come to a stop sign or stoplight, and you could stop without ever stepping on the clutch, and then you could take off again without ever using the clutch, because that fluid coupling was allowing the engine to idle with the transmission in gear. The problem is the coupling was not a torque converter. It didn't have any torque multiplication at all, which is why if you put the thing in third and left it there, it was a gutless dog. And so I think they got a really bad reputation. But that is the story of the Chrysler fluid drive. And apparently it was good enough to advertise on the bumper. I love this photo, the texture on the wall, the different colors, and of course the headlight bezels hanging there. Can you identify the year, make, and model of any of these? I can only nail the one that is second over from the left-hand side, and that is a 1961 to 1967 Ford Econoline or Falcon van, or actually the Mercury versions that they did sell in Canada that were also called Econolines. Just like up in Canada, they did the M100 and other Ford trucks under the Mercury brand. They also did that with the van. This is a 1955 Packard Clipper, nearing the end of Packard's run as they finally went out of business after the 1958 model year. You can tell that this is a 55 instead of a 54, which looks very, very similar because the 55 has got that weird S-shaped two-tone thing going on the side. Funky. But the thing I like about this car is just garish, crazy, cool emblem because the car is called a Clipper. It has a helm surrounding the trunk lock. A helm or a ship's wheel. Guys just don't design stuff like that anymore. This is a 1958 Mercury Monterey, and this is a 57 or 8 Mercury Monterey turned into a pickup truck. I don't get why I see this so often, especially in junkyards, but you still see ads for cars from the 50s, 60s, 70s that people have converted into pickup trucks like El Caminos and Rancheros. Now in the 30s, I get that because it was the Depression and people needed pickup trucks. And so they used whatever they had to convert their trunk into a bed. That makes sense. People have told me that pickups later on were used out of passenger cars because there was some kind of tax break. I have Googled and I don't see anything like that. So if you have facts, not just internet hearsay, and you know why there might be a tax advantage to building your passenger car into a pickup truck, post in the comments, let me know. Otherwise, I just think it's a questionable fashion choice. Here's a refresher course on the much maligned Chevy Corvair from 1960 to 1969. The Corvair was sort of Chevrolet's answer to the Volkswagen. It was rear-engined, it was air-cooled, it was a 6-cylinder instead of a 4-cylinder. And yes, it was opposed, meaning it's a flat pancake 6. And I think they're actually pretty cool cars, especially the second generation, but Ralph Nader did not. He was an author of a book in 1965 or 6 that was called Unsafe at Any Speed. And he called the Corvair the one-car accident. And that's because he claimed that anything with a swing arm was really unsafe. And he gave these cars a horrible reputation. He didn't go after, say, Volkswagen or Porsche as hard, but his whole book was about how the auto industry didn't care about the safety of the occupants of the car. And he made such a big deal that they actually started the National Department of Transportation as a result of this book. And later on, the National Department of Transportation also was in charge of the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. And the NHSTA did a study on the Corvair, which was released in, I think, 1972, that revealed that the Corvair was no worse than any other car in its class. Thing about that is that a lot of people question the report. They say that the way they did their testing in that study was completely bogus and didn't exist in the real world, and they had too much data that came directly from General Motors. But regardless, by the time the report came out, the Corvair was done. But they're still popular today, and you can buy them fairly inexpensively for an old collector car, especially something American and rear-wheel drive, but it's also rear-engined. I would like to have one, but only for one road trip, and then I get rid of it because I don't feel like working on it. So that's the story about my history at Turner's Auto Wrecking in Fresno, California. It was just like a junkyard crawl, right? Lots of cool stuff. Tell your friends, please share this video, and please go to my channel, find a video you've never seen before, and watch it right now. That'll help me a bunch. You can also buy my apparel. It is at the link in the description. And I will see you next time with wrenching road trips, action, and horsepower on the David Freiburger channel.